How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're starting Daf Beis, Daf 2 of Masechta Nedarim. Friends, we're beginning a new journey, a new tractate, if you will. Masechta Nedarim. Who can tell me about Masechta Nedarim? So I've learned a few daf so far, Masechta Nedarim. You know, it's interesting. So first of all, so there are a few just like differences regarding Masechta Nedarim itself. One is that it's written a little bit differently. Maybe you'll notice even on today's daf, like nothing insanely different, but there's like a little bit of like a different vibe, a different flow. Now also a big difference when it comes to Masechta Nedarim is that you learn it with the Ran. Of course, you know, we're accustomed to learning with Rashi pretty much all the time. In Arbe Psachim, there was the Rashbam, but generally speaking, we learn with Rashi. But the Rashi in Nedarim is actually not Rashi. And therefore you learn it with the Ran, which is an interesting experience. Now, the Ran is very lengthy. And because he's so lengthy, the pages, from what I can tell, it looks like the pages are actually smaller because there's so much, the Ran takes up so much room on the page that there's actually like less text. So that's also, I don't know, we'll see. That's been kind of interesting so far. Now, what else? Okay, let's talk about Nedarim. So what's a Neder? So there's basically two types of Nedarim. And Masechta Nedarim talks about one of those types. One type of a Neder is, as we've learned in the past, in the context of Korbanos. What's going on? There's doing some work outside, so they're distracting me. But, alright. Well, we gotta record. So, one is like a neder that we've seen in the context of korbanos, like a neder versus a nedave, right? If you say that I'm going to bring this, if I'm going to bring a korban to the Beis Hamikdash, that would be a neder. And if you say I'm going to bring this korban, that would be a nedava. Okay, but the other kind of neder is if you say this pizza is forbidden to me. That is the type of neder that we're talking about in Masechta Nedarim. If you say this pizza over here is forbidden to me, that's a neder. Now, there's also something that's called a shvuah. A shvuah is a different kind of thing where you say, I'm not going to eat any pizza. Did you catch the difference between those two? A neder is when you make the object forbidden to yourself, whereas a shvuah is when you make yourself forbidden to the object. Now, here we're learning in Masechta Nedarim. There's also a separate Masechta in Seder Nezikin called shvuas. So Shavuos talks about Shavuos, Nedarim talks about Nedarim. So again, a neder is when you make an object forbidden to yourself, whereas a Shavuos is when you make yourself forbidden to an object. Okay, I think that's probably enough for us to jump in. There are other things related to Nedarim, but we'll get to there in just a second when we dive into the Mishnah. Friends, without further ado, we're going to start in Daf Beis Amud Aleph of Masechta Nedarim. Says the Mishnah, called kinuye nedarim ki nedarim. How do you define a kinui? Like a reference, a variable? Let me actually see how the article defines kinui. Equivalent terms. Okay, a kinui is an equivalent term. Okay, an equivalent term. A kinui. So any kinuis for Nedarim are like Nedarim. Okay, so this already gets us into some new material. So, what's an example of a kinui? Example of a kinui is like a konam. What's a konam? Well, that gets into another thing called yados. What's yados? Okay. So, when it comes to a neder, there's a certain template to a neder. Neder is a certain template. You have to follow this template. You don't follow the template, it's not a neder. The template is, you say, this pizza is forbidden to me. And that's really shorthand for this pizza is forbidden to me like a sacrifice, like a korban. Because a korban, of course, is hektish. It's also bano. So then, so therefore, really the long form is this pizza is forbidden to me like a korban. Now, another way to refer to a korban is a konam. Another way to refer to a korban is a konam. So if you also say that, you know, that this pizza is konam to me, so then that also is a neder. So kol kinuye nedarim ki nedarim that any sort of equivalent terms when it comes to neder has the validity of a neder. V'achromim kachromim, and a cherem, if I understand correctly, a cherem is a neder, right? If you say that this pizza is cherem to me, or alternatively any equivalent things like cherek, I don't know, any those equivalent terms. Ushvuas kishvuas, and any equivalent things of shvuas, like shvusa, for example, that would be like a shvuah. Unazirus kinazirus, and also equivalents of nazirus. So, for example, if you say paziach, okay. So any of these equivalent terms would be like the terms themselves. Ha'omer lachvero mudarani mimcha mufrashani mimcha muchakani mimcha. A fellow says to his comrade, I am nedered, I am vowed. By the way, remember we had the word vower recently, and I thought it was a geschmacka word, a vower. I think I maybe even confirmed with Dennis if it was a thing. I think maybe Dennis even confirmed it was a thing. Apparently the art scroll is using the word vower, so I guess vower, it's a thing. Because the art scroll, if vower wasn't a thing, I feel like the art scroll would avoid it. For the most part, I feel like they would avoid it. I feel like they avoid things that aren't really things. I feel like, if they're aware of it. So if you say that, I'm avowed from you, or I am separated from you, or I am distanced from you, shani ochel lecha, that I will not be eating any of your stuff, shani toim lecha, I will not be tasting any of your stuff, osir. So that is considered osir, and that's basically yados, right? Meaning it doesn't mention the thing about, doesn't mention anything about like a korban or anything like that. Okay, menuda ani lecha, I am excommunicated from you. Rabbi Kiva chokech bazel achmir. So Rabbi Kiva was stringent and leaned stringently to say that would be considered a neder, and you should stay away. All right, friends. Beis and beis, we're getting to the Gemara. Kol kinui nedarim ki nedarim. All right. So we said in our Mishnah that all the kinois of nedarim are like nedarim, v'achrabim kachrabim, u'shvuos k'shvuos, and zirus. We went down the whole list, right? Nedarim, cherems, shvuos, nazir. Ma'ishna gabi nazir delo katani lulichulu, u'ma'ishna gabi nedarim de katani lichulu. How come by nazir? So conveniently, nazir is in the same book as nedarim. So if we look at the first Mishnah of Masechta Nazir, it says kol kinuye nazirus kinazirus, but that's it. It doesn't mention anything about nedarim, shvuos, chromim. So how come by nedarim it mentions all of them, the whole laundry list? Is that what it's called, the laundry list? It throws in the kitchen sink, and why by nazir it leaves out the kitchen sink? It leaves the kitchen sink where it is, hooked up to the plumbing. All right. So okay. So mishum de neder u'shvua ksive gabe adadi, because neder and shvua are written together in the same pasuk. As the Ran points, Rashi points out. Does the Ran also? Yeah, the Ran also points out. Dechsiv ki yidor neder laHashem o ishava shvua. So they're written next to each other. So therefore, we mention neder and shvua. So Tani Tartan, that's why I mentioned both of them. Tani Tartan, and once already you're mentioning two of them, so Tani Lechulo, so you may as well throw in the kitchen sink and mention all of them. Mention Oichit, Nazir, Cherem, all of the things. Velesne Kinui, Shvuos, Basin Nedarim. Why not mention Shvuos immediately after Nedarim? If we're saying that Nedarim and Shvuos are right next to each other in the pasuk, so why not say Kol Kinuye Nedarim ki Nedarim u'Shvuos ki Shvuos? But that's not what it says. It says Kol Kinuye Nedarim ki Nedarim v'Achromim k'Achromim. Why is it going to Achromim? Shouldn't it go? Why not go straight to Shvuos if they're written next to each other in the pasuk? Either the Tana Nedarim the Mitzir Cheftza Olei. Well, once we're talking about a neder that, as I said earlier, you're making the object forbidden to you, you're making the pizza forbidden to you. So Tananami Chramim de Mitzvah Chefza Ale. So we mentioned also Cherems, where also you're making the object, the pizza, also to you. Lafuke Shvue de Kasur Nafshe min Chefza. To the exclusion of a Shvue, of a swear, of an oath, where you make yourself forbidden on the pizza, on the item. Friends, I must have mentioned already that I recalled. Yeah, just started raining in Eretz Yisrael. Mamish started raining just a few days ago. Day one. got rocked with a cold, huh? Day one. Hopefully we won't have like a Masechta Tainus situation again. That was schwer. You remember that last year? I Pashit had no voice. Zero. Nilch. Nada. And that was not pleasant. Hopefully that won't happen. Says the Gemara, Pasach B'Kinuyin. So the Gemara, the Mishnah started out with kinuis. The Mishnah started out with kinuis. Okay, I'm sorry. Pasach B'Kinuyin, right? Kol Kinuyei Nedarim, right? These equivalencies of Nedarim. Umefarish Yados. But then after saying Kol Kinuyei Nedarim Kinedarim, V'achram Kachram, Shuas Keshuas, Nezirus Kenezirus. Then when it comes to actually explaining stuff, what's it explaining? Yados. We go into the details regarding Yados. I don't understand why are we starting talking about Kinuyim and then we start explaining Yados. And more so, Yados Inshe. Right, Yados Inshe. Did the Mishnah forget to talk about Yados? I mean, if you noticed, it's like a funny Mishnah. On the one hand, we start talking about Kinuyim, right? Called Kinuyim Nedarim, Kinedarim, Machram, Kachram, Shuas, Keshuas, Nazir, Kinazir. We don't mention anything about Yados. All of a sudden, we start explaining Yados. We start talking about Yados. Who mentioned anything about Yados? So, and for the Gemara, no, the Mishnah is talking about Yados. It's missing a few words. You have to add a few things in. Don't worry. Chill out. Take a chill pill. Called Kinuye Nedarim, Kinedarim, V'Yados Nedarim, Kinedarim. What you have to read the Mishnah is that all of the equivalencies of vows are like vows, and the equivalency equivalencies, I guess, of Yados are like V'Yados Nedarim, Kinedarim, and Yados are also like Nedarim. So if you say that this pizza is forbidden to me, but don't mention anything about a korban, so that is also like a neder. So it does mention, right? It's missing in the Mishnah, but you add it in. That we add in Yados. Okay, fine. Very nice. So we mentioned Kinuyim, we mentioned Yados. V'lifrosh Kinuyim Bereisha. But then, okay, so if we first mentioned Kinuyim, right, called Kinuyim Nedarim, Kinedarim, and then apparently we're mentioning V'Yados Nedarim, Kinedarim, why do we then go directly into explaining Yados? Wouldn't it make sense to first explain Kinuyim, which comes first? In the Mishnah, right, we say Kinuyim and then Yados, but then we start explaining Yados. Wouldn't it make sense to say Kinuyim and then Yados, and then go in order and first explain Kinuyim? How the Salik Mine, how Mefarish Bereisha? Well, because the way it goes is the one that you mentioned last, you explain first, right? I learned in 9th grade, I think, we had this teacher, what was it called? Last in, first out. So I guess is like last in, first out or something. That first you mention Kinuyim, then you mention Yados, and then first you mention Yados, and then you get back to Kinuyim. And that's a standard procedure. Kedetnan, as we learned in the Mishnah, Bame Madlikin, Uvama Ein Madlikin, right? What do you light Shabbos licht with, and what do you not light with? Ein Madlikin v'chule. So we say, what do we light with, what don't we light with, and then we start explaining what we don't light with. Bame Tomden Uvama Ein Tomden. What do we insulate with? What don't we insulate with? Ein Tomden v'chule. And then we go into what we don't insulate with. Bama Isha Yotza Uvama Ein Yotza. With what does a woman go out on Shabbos, and with what does she not go out? Lo Teitze Isha. That, and then we start explaining what she doesn't go out with. So we see that whatever it mentions second, we then explain first. One second, is that really true? Is that really true? That globally, that consistently, whenever we have, a first item, then a second item, we're going to explain the second item first. But we learn in a Mishnah, there are those who who inherit and bequeath. There are those who inherit and don't bequeath. Then it explains first the nochal and manchilin, which comes first. There are those who are permitted to their husbands but forbidden to their yavams. There are those who are permitted to their yavams and asuras to their husbands. And then it starts explaining these are the ones that are permitted to their husbands and forbidden to their yavams, i.e. the one that came first, it explains first. there are those minchas that require oil and frankincense, and there are those that require only oil but not frankincense. Ve'elu tunus shemen ulavona, and then it explains these are the ones that require oil and frankincense, i.e., the one that it mentioned first, we explained first. Yesh tunus hagasha ve'en tunus tenufa. There are those korbanos that require bringing to the mizbeach, but they don't require waving. Tenufa v'lo hagasha. There are those that require waving but not bringing to the mizbeach. Ve'elu tunus hagasha. These are the ones that require bringing to the mizbeach, i.e., it explains the first one first. Yesh b'chor l'nachla ve'en b'chor l'koyin. There are those that are a bechor, a firstborn when it comes to inheritance, but not a firstborn with regard to pidyon haben. Bechor l'koyin ve'en bechor l'nachla. There are those that are considered bechor for pidyon haben, but not for inheritance. Ve'elu bechor l'nachla ve'en bechor l'koyin. And then we explain the first one first, right? When you're a bechor for inheritance, but not for pidyon haben. So apparently there are instances where we explain one thing and then a second, right? When we have one thing and then a second thing, and we explain the first thing first. Excuse me, I gotta sneeze. Okay, so and for the Gemara, Halein, when it comes to these ones, when you have one item and a second item, and then we explain the first item first, Mishum da'av shulei, because there's a lot of halachis, it's a big geshmake, lamda shesugya, mefarish ahu, the pasach bereisha. So that's why we mentioned the first thing first. But what about it says, what can an animal go out with, what can an animal not go out with? That it isn't such a lamda shesugya, and it starts talking about the things that go out, i.e. the first thing first, even though it's not such a lamda yeshiva shesugya. Rather, the Gemara says it's not so exact. I mean, sometimes it'll explain the second thing first, sometimes it'll explain the first thing first. I mean, it's not an exact science. Okay, sometimes it does it this way, sometimes it does it that way. Alternatively, even though yes, that's true, sometimes it does it this way and sometimes it does it that way, and there isn't always an explanation for it, but in this case there actually is an explanation for why we explain Yadis first, because Yadis, I did the Asin Midrashe, Mefarish Lehon Bereisha, because since we learn out Yadis from a drash and a pasuk, which is like, it's more exciting when it's a rabbinic drasha. I think we've had this in the past before, right? Like that, that the rabbis were so excited to talk about the Derabanan first because it comes from like their creativity, so it's more exciting. So because it comes from a drasha, so we explain it first. V'lip pasach hadein bereisha. So, but if that's the case, that Yados are so exciting because they come from a drasha, so why did we say that the Mishnah reads kol kinuye nedarim kinedarim v'yados Nedarim kinedarim? Why did we first mention kinuyim and then yados? If yados are so exciting because they come from a drasha, why don't you mention yados before kinuyim? So, and for the Gemara, pasach bi kinuyim de oraise. Well, we first mentioned kinuyim mi de oraise bereisha v'adam mefarish yados, and then only afterwards we mention yados the asyon le midrashe that come from a drasha. Now, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Yados are also midoraisa, but I guess that they're not written explicitly in the Torah, whereas I guess Kinuyin, are explicitly written in the Torah, but Yados come from a drasha. Hanichel man omer Kinuyin lashon nachrim. So that makes sense if you say that Kinuyin. Oh wait, excuse me, 1 second. So if I'm not mistaken, both kinuyim and yados are midoraisa. However, yados come from a drasha from a pasuk, whereas kinuyim are more clearly stated in the Torah. Fine. So Nichel man da'amar kinuyim lashon nachrim. So I understand, according to the man da'amar who says that kinuyis are basically just alternative ways of saying swears, right? Of saying vows. And therefore, okay, if that's the case, then yeah, it's not such a leap between, vows in the Torah and these kinuyim, which are just alternative ways of saying vows. So I understand why kinuyim would come first, because they're more closely related to the text, as opposed to yados, which are coming from exposition of the text. But according to the opinion, which I believe is Rish Lakish's opinion, that a kinui is actually, the Chachamim defined what these kinuyim are. So the midoraisa, but like the Chacham defined what they are. So if that's the case, then it's also kind of a chiddush, just like yados, in which case, why should kinuis come before yados? So Michael and Meimar, how come kinuis come before first if they're essentially established defined by the Chachamim? So mikatani yados. So now the Gemara says, well, actually, eino chinami. Did the Mishnah explicitly say yados anywhere? No. Didn't we learn out yados from a chasuri mechsur that we said, look, yados is missing in the Mishnah, so we have to add it in. Well, if we have to add it in, so then just add it in first if you want. Aktim nami. Vitani yados. Kol yados nedarim ki nedarim v'chol kinui nedarim ki nedarim. So if that's the case, then you actually can, right? It doesn't say yados explicitly in the Mishnah. So if we're adding yados to the Mishnah, sure, add it first. So according to, I believe it's Rish Lakish, who says that kinuyim are actually established by the rabbis what these kinuyim are, which means that they're also a chiddush, maybe even more so than right. If the kinuyim are determined by the rabbis, then they're even more of a chiddush than yados, which are expanded from a verse. So if that's the case, yados should really come before kinuyim. And we're saying, okay, well, you can do that because yados aren't specifically mentioned in the Mishnah. We're just adding it from a chasuri mechsra. So just say, okay, put yados first. Say, yados, kol yados nedarim ki nedarim, v'chol kinuye nedarim ki nedarim. Ve'elu ein yados, and these are yados, ha'omer lachveru, right? Somebody who says to his friend, mudarani, etc. Ve'elu ein kinuyin, konam, konach, konam, and then these are the kinuyim, konach, konam, konas or whatever, which I believe comes later on, daf yud. So, okay, fine, very, very nice. Well, friends, that was daf beis of Masechta Nedarim. I don't think it was particularly difficult, right? So, we discussed a little bit what a neder is, that you make like a pizza forbidden to you, as opposed to shvur where you make yourself forbidden to the pizza. We learned about kinuyim, which are different ways of making neders. So, for example, like a konam or something like that. We learned about yados, right? The long form of the neder versus the short form, and the short form is called yados. And that was that beis Masechta Nedarim. I hope you liked that. So far, Nedarim's been alright. I hope the whole thing is going to be alright. That would be really great. So, catch you later. Peace out.